Okay, so welcome to the second workshop in our web development series. This week we'll be focusing on developing the back-end / server side of our application, and we'll be doing that in Node.js, which hopefully all of you guys have by now.
If anybody doesn't, let me know.
Yeah. And this is just stuff that hopefully you've already been following. Again, if you haven't, do so as quickly as possible, or ask Edwin if you have a problem. Oh wait. Edwin, did you want to talk about this?
These are just the steps for the installation.
No, I know, but everyone's already using them.
Okay, so one of the things I had you guys install on your system was Node and NPM. So what these things do is Node will be what we're writing our server in, and NPM is essentially our dependency manager. The reason why we chose this option was because all of you, when you got into the directory, you simply ran npm install and npm start, and as you saw, if it was done correctly, your server just starts from there. We set that up specifically so that way, regardless of what machine you'd be on, you'd be able to get it started with as few steps as possible. And I'd like to think that was mostly successful for a lot of people. But I like this specifically because of that capability, where I can go to whatever machine that I want to install the dependencies and just go. I think that leads to a lot of consistency across a lot of different systems themselves. Okay, oh yeah, I'm going over Restful API stuff. Yeah. Okay, so what we'll be writing today in Node is called a Restful API. How many of you guys know what a Restful API is? Of course you do. All right. Tell me what a Restful API is. I guess you're not allowed to.
I think.
Are you talking?
Are you asking Steven?
Yeah, I'm asking Steven.
Essentially, it's just a design node where you're able to make requests in a pattern that, I would say, whether you want to just get something from a URL path that's generally meaningful, or you want to update something, then you can potentially post or put it there. So it's actually using the HTTP verbs that way.
Sure, absolutely. So I have a very quick question for you. What is this that I'm typing in to my address bar right here? Besides google.com, what is that thing that I'm doing? I.e., that's a URL. So this is what makes a RESTful API work, is a URL. So when you take a RESTful API, you make a call out to a specific URL, and at the endpoint of your API, there's a function sitting there that says, okay, I've been called. This is what I've been programmed to do at that point. And this is essentially a very large portion of how the internet actually works. It makes a lot of calls out. It makes a lot of calls out to different servers, and it does all kinds of funky nonsense when it actually gets over there. For an example, I'm going to make a very quick Google search. So I made a Google search called fish. So if we go over to this network tab, which is inside of your developer options, I can actually see what my search was. If I click on this thing, I can see what I just searched for inside of Google. I can see I made a request to a really big, disgusting URL up there, and I made a GET request to that URL with the query of fish. So this is how we're going to make our API work, where when our client, which is what the user will see on their computer, when they do something on their machine, depending on what they're trying to do, that'll make a request to our actual API, and our API will be able to do something and let them update their application properly. That's pretty much it for this API. The two most common calls the two calls we'll be making are the most common calls that exist in the internet, which is a GET request and a POST request. So I'm willing to bet most people can figure out, but somebody tell me what a GET request is. Just take a random guess.
You're requesting a web page?
I'm requesting some form of resource. So in cases that could be a web page. I can very easily request just a JSON object. And essentially, most of you have seen a JSON object. Those of you who are in 1.15 now are currently working with them. And essentially a JSON object is just a key value store that's being sent out as a very small byte packet. So it's really interesting in that when you send a JSON object out, you see it really printed in code and everything like that. But when you actually send it, it doesn't do that. Now, what it does is it takes that JSON object and it squishes it down and makes one really big string out of that, appends that to the end of the response, and throws it back up to the browser on its own. So that's the majority of a lot of data that you'll be dealing with when you deal with a lot of applications. It will send you data back and forth in JSON. This is what we'll be doing a lot of in our workshop. Our actual front end will be running statically, which means you just simply open a file and it goes into your browser, which is called decoupling the front end. And you'll see why a lot of people are going to that direction in a little later on in the workshop. So we're going to start digging into the actual source code of this. Heba's going to go over the different sections of our Restful API and explain what they are and why they work.
All right. So if you are to go into your actual clone repository, let's see here. So if we go, okay. So if you, where am I? All right. Let me. Okay. So this is what it looks like right now if you are in the API branch of the Web App Workshop. Make sure that you are in the correct branch. If you need to check out the right one, you can do git checkout API and then press enter and you'll be in there. So if you do a quick directory search, you can see that there's a few. If you go into server, this is where we can kind of, wait, this is not what I want. And then you go into app. This is where you can kind of see some of the files that we're going to be looking at, specifically with your config and routes. So if I go back, let's see here. No, that's the wrong one. So with config, this is specifically with stuff for the Restful API in terms of configuration, while routes is for the endpoints and functions to call and implement. And let's see, if I go back, let me know. So if we go into the config folder itself, and just like to check in, is everyone able to find this? I don't know if everyone was able to clone correctly and all that. Yay, nay, okay.
Speak down for a moment.
Yes.
No,
Oh.
Okay.
So I mean, yeah, this is like, it's fairly, informal, so if you have any issues. But basically we have a few JavaScript files in here, and they all have different functions. So if you check back to here, it kind of tells you.
Those of you who are stuck inside of your API and you're not accepting any more commands, Control-C and just kill the server.
Should I break? Or should I keep going? Okay. So with, as you noticed, there were three. You have Winston.js, db.js, and also config.js. So with Winston, this is the configuration for the debugger. You may or may not have done some things with debugging in 1.15, 1.16, and further on, but those kind of processes also apply when you're building a web app. And then you have db.js, and this relates to the MySQL database that you would have built last time in our first workshop, and kind of getting those connections, because this backend part and the Restful API will be communicating with your MySQL database. And then finally we have the config.js, and this is for express port configuration, and also with database connection configuration, so also dealing with those connections. So if I go back, I keep forgetting which way it goes, so no. All right, I don't know if I should show the files themselves, or. So if we look at, actually I think he has it open, right?
Yeah, feel free to explore this on your own too.
Yeah,
There's a lot happening.
Let's see. No, I'll just go in then probably. Alright, there we go. So if you check out the config file, as you can see, Vim is just a, yes.
There's one important thing we forgot to do. Inside of the config.js file, where you see config.db connection there, change the user and password strings to what you set the login for your MySQL database to be.
So I don't know if you guys have a text editor. You can use Vim, which this is. If you're using Vim, you need to go into insert mode by pressing I, and then when you're done, you press escape, and then you can do right to, and then quit. That's how you do that.
Because without this, you won't be, without changing those browser
Vim
routes,
is
you won't
like
be able
tough
to
though,
pull
like
data
this.
from your
Or if you have Atom, or I don't know.
which is,
I don't want to speak over Edwin either, so.
what's up?
Vim needs to do this.
Does somebody have a question?
Other questions?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, don't interrupt yourself. Just keep going. I'll
Well, there's nothing much more to say. Okay, so as you're kind of, I don't want to interrupt people. Okay, Rachel, I'm talking just to you. Check out this database file.
Stay strong.
Yeah, it's. Oh, wait a moment, because this is actually kind of important. All right. So what I have right now, this is the db.js, and as you can see, you've got your client, MySQL. And this is Knex, which is what we're going to be using. What else can I show? If I quit that. And then this is. I get right. It's just a little. Yeah, that's like pretty much it. Because this is your Winston file. I don't know if you guys saw the DB one, but in there you could see your client, which is MySQL. So I'll go back to that really quickly. Here's your client, and we're using Knex, which we're going to get into in more detail a little later in this workshop. But as you can see here, this is where you're kind of configuring these things and sort of laying the foundation. So now, I think I'm going to hand it over to Edwin, Wendy. Yeah, because, so Wendy's going to talk a little bit more about what you want about routes.
Do you want me to just keep going?
Which is kind of.
Okay, yeah.
Does he need help? All right.
I won't trade.
I'll like kind of float around and see if he.
So the other folder in the directory besides config, as you probably saw, was routes. And basically, the routes are what map the endpoints to the functions. Our routes are located in index.routes.js. So I'm just going to go to that real quick.
So So yeah, Wendy's
Yeah.
is going out of the app directory and going to where route section is.
Yeah. So this is index. Oops. Correct? Yes. Nope, that was not it. Okay. Okay, so this is index.route.js. There are two main categories of routes that we have, which are user routes and task routes. So these two categories basically correspond to the databases that you set up in the last workshop, which were users and tasks. So yeah. And then the routes distinguish between the different endpoints based on the URL and based on the type of HTTP request. So I'm going to go back. So here's an example of where we declare an endpoint which accepts a GET request. As you can see, it says .get. And the route also has a function declared with it, which basically has the logic that will trigger when the endpoint is called. And then here's another example of a post request. So now that you guys know what that basically looks like, we're going to explain each part of it. So the first part, router, is just the express library in Node.js that lets us declare this as a route. And then .get and .post are the HTTP requests that Edwin talked about earlier. And then rec is the actual request body, and that can be called and accessed using the standard context for accessing any JSON object in JavaScript. And then res is the response header, so that's where we insert any data we want to send back to the front end. So notice how the second example, the URL has an ID. So that is a parameter, and we can pass a parameter into our logic for our endpoint by just modifying it, and that's pretty easy. So if we wanted to change, for example, oh, yeah. Let me make this bigger. Bigger? It can't go any bigger. Okay, this is as big as it gets. So, for example, this 2 would be a parameter here, or, I mean, there are other examples we'll go through in the future, but yeah, okay. So, oh, I guess, yeah, there's an example there. So we can change the endpoint in this example by calling that. And that will get all the tasks created by a user whose ID is 3 in your database. Is that not big enough? Oh. Okay, can everyone see it? Yeah? Okay. So there are other ways to modify the endpoint too. So you can append your URL using query information, and that will send different data under different key value stores. And you can also just send JSON objects through the request body. We can access each of these parts by calling a different part of the quest. So these are some parts. So these are, you can have parameters to URLs, and so that will be rec.params dot whatever, and then, dot your key. And then so you can have query data sent to the URL, and also body data from your request body. And then using these values just allows you to control what your function at the endpoint does to help you get the data that you want when you call the endpoint. And then controllers is just the functions that are executed. They're declared implicitly. So like if you go to here, this is the function, these are the controller. This is the controller. It's just declared within the, it's declared implicitly, so yeah. Is that a better way?
Because this will show up a lot cleaner.
Okay.
There you go.
zoom
Hit
in?
Control Shift plus.
Okay.
Yeah, now you can highlight the controller.
Yeah, so these are the different endpoints that we've set up for you already. Some of them are already finished and some of them are not. And that is your task for today, to complete the ones that are not filled in. But yeah, I think I'll let Edwin take over now.
Okay. So before we start actually making changes to your code, let's start playing around with this just a little bit. So up here at the top, I have an endpoint that doesn't do anything, which I call my sanity check endpoint, and all it's going to do is say hi. So let's go over to our terminals, and let's start up our API. So make sure you navigate back to the server folder and run npm start, so that way it starts up. You'll see a bunch of little text as the whole thing builds, and then it'll sit here and tell you that the server started on port 3000. So what that means is that when we call our local host and we call port 3000, we are now accessing our API in some way. So if you open up Postman, which is a very nice tool that lets us make post and get requests, as Wendy said, or any other requests that we'd like to do, let's call that open endpoint for our sanity check. So we're gonna, so if we go back to our code real quick, we see that this endpoint accepts.
Sorry, does everyone have Postman?
Well, we'll get it now.
Okay, it's a lot easier than probably anything else you've tried to install.
Yeah.
How do you get to that?
So
The code?
Oh, you gotta go.
The code is inside of the stuff you just
Yeah,
cloned.
he's just using Atom, which is a specific text editor. But this is inside what
Index.
folder? Yeah.
Index dot, so it's inside of routes, the routes folder, and it's index.routes.js.
I mean, you can just use your
And-
file explorer, to be
Yeah.
honest, if
Yeah.
you're on Windows or...
So if you are in your general repository thing, if you go into server and then app, then you'll find routes, and then from there, just
If anybody
Okay.
needs any help, also...
yeah, me and Wendy will come around, just like wave us over and we can show you.
Okay, so continuing on from where I left off, we can see inside of my API I have an endpoint that accepts a GET, and it's a /hi endpoint. So this is just to make sure that our API is actually working properly in some form. So we're going to go over to Postman, which you can install by going to the Chrome Web Store and simply searching for Postman. And install this guy down here. And he will and when you open him up, he'll give you this really funky little interface where you have a bunch of little buttons and a URL thing, and you have no idea what it does. So up here is where we specify the URL we want to call. I am hosting this on my local machine, which means I'm going to have it on localhost, and my Node Restful API is at port 3000. So I can call this, and I'm going to call my sanity endpoint, which is my local machine, my RESTful API port /hi. So when I call this, I will receive back a little hi, which is exactly what has been programmed into our API to actually show that it's working. So this means that if anything else fails, I can make a call to my API for something. Sure. Is anybody having issues with that? We'll take a couple minutes for a break to get you guys squared away if you're having troubles.
Yeah, just make sure you can call this and get that response back. Does anybody have any questions?
I'll make it a bit bigger.
Let's try it.
Nope. That does not go any bigger. Never mind, that doesn't go any
Unless you
bigger.
could change your resolution or something.
Nope, I can't do anything with that, so that's not going to get any bigger. Sorry. Alright, most of you guys have your little hi showing up on your things. If anybody
No,
else
I couldn't. Oh, I just need to install.
Try to run it.
Gulp wasn't working. Did you run npm install before npm start?
There you go. npm install will grab the dependencies, npm start will start the application itself. Okay. Anything else? Okay. So I'm going to keep going for now, with the assumption that at least a good portion of you guys have figured it out. So when I make that request, I set up this API with a very specific feature, which was the Winston application. Because what this will do is this will let me take any request I give to my API, and it'll log it right here on the terminal. So anything I send up to this API, we can see from here. So we can see that my request is calling the URL with the /hi endpoint on my API, and that is a GET request, which is specified over here. What version I'm using with HTTP and the original URL that I'm using. So this will log all bits of information. Remember what Wendy was saying about parameters and such being used for this? So let me show you how that looks different when I make different types of calls. We'll still use the hi endpoint because this will let me show off the data without actually having to influence my server just yet. So if I open up this little params tab, this will append data to a query. So what that means is that I will actually be appending my key value store to the end of my URL. So we'll just throw some text in here, just for the sake of text. And you'll see up at the top there, now my hi is appended by a question mark, test equals text. If I send that data to the back end, and we go over here, now we can see that inside of my request itself, we now have this query element that's being populated by a key, which is test, and a value, which is a string of text. I can go into my API now, and I can call that .query using this down here, and I can call a specific header from there. And if I take that instead and make this a post request, I'm going to change up my endpoint just a little bit here to actually. So if I call this, what do you think is going to happen if I call this post request on hi? Reminder, this endpoint is only meant to accept GET. So what do you think is going to happen? Not work. Yeah, it'll not work and it'll get really mad at me. See? It's telling me that I can't post to that location. So let's choose an endpoint that I can post to. So I'm going to put these up here. So what endpoint can I actually post to on this API? Okay. What URL is that though?
Task?
Yes, task ID. So let's do that really quick here. So I'm going to call and it accepts a number as its parameter option, which is an ID. And what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to insert a little bit of body data, which is the exact same thing that I just sent, which are these test elements here that will be sent in the form of a JSON object. So now if I do that, we'll actually see now there's another section of my request that's being populated, which is the body element. This can also be called. Same way we call a request, I would call my request dot body dot whatever key I put inside of there, which in this case is test. This will let me take that string test and be able to use it however I want my application. So let's start actually doing something with this and seeing some actual results from our database. This is currently hooked up to my database, as it should be to yours as well, and it should work in the same way if you configured your config.js properly. So what we're going to do here is I have a user on this thing. So I have a route that will return every single user from my database. I will go into this call in just a moment here. Actually, I'll do that right up. No, we'll get into that in just a sec here. So I'm going to do a quick GET request from that location. And what we see now is a whole array of every single user that's on my database. By the way, this is horribly insecure, and you shouldn't use it in any sort of enterprise level thing. So, but for the sake of being able to make really simple requests, I set it up this way so you can grab every user that you have in your database. So, the reason why we can do this is because we're using a library called Knex. So how many of you guys played with Knex when you were a kid? Little plastic blocks and things like that, kind of like Legos, not nearly as good as Legos.
I did it better, but whatever.
So what this does is it allows us to connect our Node.js API to any database that they support. So mostly these are SQL databases. I don't believe there's any for like NoSQL databases such as Mongo, but any SQL-based database Knex.js has support for. We can do several different calls to that database and get whatever data we want out of that. So, for example, my users table. I want to get all my users. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in. We'll actually go to the code here. I specify the database that I'm going to use, which we specified in our config.db. I'm going to specify the table inside of that database I'm going to use, which is the user table. Oh, that's on the Postman. The GET request is way up there. Scroll up one here. Thank you. I'm going to call a select, which essentially does the same thing as the select query inside of SQL. I'm going to select all of the rows inside that database. And then I'm going to call this funky little .then function. Does anybody know what .then means in this case? I didn't think so. So what happens inside of this is when you call your database, it creates what's known as a promise. In order to keep it as short as possible, the idea of a promise in JavaScript is just simply the concept that I'm going to make a function, I'm going to make a call to some resource. I don't know when this is going to complete, but at some point in the future, this thing promises, hey, I will be finished and I will have data that I'm looking for out of this. So what this then function does is this will wait until that promise is completed, and it'll let me do something afterwards. So when I call my select, it'll go into my database and it'll get the data that I want out of this. It'll wait until I have the entire result of that. Then I have a small little function that takes that result of that query and simply throws it up to the front. It throws it up to the front end in a JSON format, and I can read it. As a result, I get this pretty little set of JSON objects, which are all of my users. I get the username of each one, and I get the ID of each one. Is anybody confused with this? Anybody have questions about this? Is anybody completely lost?
Oh, I'm getting errors.
Nice.
All right, it happens. We'll figure it out.
Do you need help, like right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
You got it.
So let's say we want to grab a user that has a very specific ID. How are we going to do that? I've already got the endpoint right there. So somebody explain to me how I can use the endpoint that I have on the screen here and get a user with a very specific ID. Steven?
Then the data storage, so local host 43000 that and the ID that you want.
Yes. I'm gonna send a request to my local host /user / I append this with whatever ID that I want. So let's grab my user 1. So I'm gonna append that with 1, and I'm gonna call my backend. And you'll see I only get the user with the user ID of 1 as a result here. So that's the only case that matched. So going into my code, I simply made a call to my backend. I accepted the ID section of this URL. I took that element and created my select clause inside of my SQL query. Sorry, I did a select inside of my SQL query. And I created a where clause where I'm only going to grab every element that has an ID that matches the parameter that I put into this. And as a result, it returned only one row that is only the singular user object that I was looking for. So let's add a user now. So I have an endpoint, also declared inside of here. That's a post request. It goes to /user.
Yeah.
And inside the query, I put the username of the new user that I'm going to be putting into my system. So I went into Postman and I accessed the parameters. And I simply threw a username key and I threw a string in there that I'm going to put in there. So what I'm going to do from there is I'm going to do an insert query, which will simply insert into my database my new user. From there, I have another query afterwards that's going to grab that user and return it back to the front end. So let's quickly run that. So now I have a new user inside my backend, which has an ID of 9, and it has a username of hello. And if I call my get again, if I call my get again for that username, I will also see that that username is in there. I can call it, just like any other user that's inside the database. So now, since we're making a small little to-do list app, let's use that exact same technique, and let's throw it into, and let's make a task. Actually, let's start off with grabbing any tasks we have from the database. So how am I going to do this? So go into your index.route.js, and we'll be able to see, and you'll see when we actually get our task call here, it'll be very similar to how we do the user. So what are we going to do to get all the tasks? What's going to change from this grabbing all users function in order for me to get everything that's in the tasks table? Essentially, yeah. So let's take this code here. So once you save the file and you edit it, it'll auto-build and it'll run. Now I got all the tasks that are in my backend, which I only have one task, which is, well, finish the backend. And we don't have that done yet, so we can't mark that task as completed. Let's say I want to add a task. How am I going to add a task? So we've already added a user. So what would make the most sense here if we want to add a task now? essentially, we will simply add a task the same way we did this guy. I actually realized I'm missing a function. Yeah. Bad news is I totally forgot what the thing looks like. Oops. Sorry, I just had to double check what all my columns were inside of tasks. Okay, so now that I have that, I have a couple of things I want to add in there. I should only have an ID, a task, and created by. Yep. So I want to take this task here, and I want to actually add it to my database. So I need to make a post request. We're going to add a little body data into here. And let's just insert any sort of stuff, any kind of task that we want to get. Let's say we got to go to the store, and we got to get milk. So this will go into the body of our actual request. I think I have a query, though. Nope, we're good. So now I'm going to send this up to my endpoint, which will include the user of the user that has actually created this task. So I'm just going to say user 4 made this task because I can. I feel like it. I don't know why user 4 wants to go get milk, but he's going to go get milk anyway. So, can anybody tell me why this thing is giving me a loading icon when nothing's being returned yet? What's up? No, there's not an error, but yes, there is an error. So everything is functioning exactly how it's supposed to be, but there's one small thing that's missing. Now this thing is waiting on a response, and it has no response to it. Because if you look, my server is functioning perfectly fine. So let's go. We're going to go into the code and we're going to make a response. We're going to cancel this request, and we're going to do it again while we wait for this thing to rebuild. Good to go. Oops. Now it's broken. Oh. Oops. And the task table or just the, yeah. There we go. That should be better. My bad. I pointed it to the wrong table. That's why. So, now that we're there, our task has successfully been added to our backend. And if I go back to where I was listing everything earlier from my backend, we can see that the request came in. It's got a body, it's got a task, it says get milk. So let's hope this works. What's that? Oh yeah, sorry. Much better. So now we can see that inside my database, I now have a new task, funky little task here that says get milk. It was created by user 4. So I can now take that index and I can filter these tasks based upon that.
Oh, so like it's like a feature, a visual.
So over here I have a get request where I can pull all of the information from my task table and filter it based upon the user who has created that task. So let's see if we can get that get milk. So remember this created by index for us. So what was the user who created the get milk task? Does anybody remember?
The number you just deleted?
Yes.
4.
Because I didn't realize that. So now, when I do that, I can grab my task, which is get milk, which is only limited to user number 4. However, though, if I take out that number 4 at the end there, I'll end up grabbing both tasks with the ID and all the rest of the information about it. We can use this in order to construct a really nice little task for ourselves. And then if we wanted to, and I have my database set up properly, which I don't, like, because I'm clueless, is we can filter them only by active or completed tasks. But I don't have a status column on them because I forgot to update my database because I didn't pay attention to it in the first workshop. So we're gonna have to leave that one alone. But
Okay.
plus, we're running out of time.
Yeah, we are out of time.
All right, guys. For this week, we are unfortunately out of time. So all of this stuff is up online. We will be merging in and pushing all of the working functions into there. Take some time, look through them, get your stuff working with your database and your backend, and we'll be back to see you next week with front-end calls. We'll also have any information about the next workshop up on our Facebook page. Also, for those of you guys who are here for ACM, next week is our ACM elections. Our meeting will be in Davis, 113A, from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. on Friday. That is the date of our elections. Come on by, vote for the guys who are going to be inside of office next year. We'll have information on they're blind elections as expected. We'll have information on our Facebook as well about this and send out our newsletter. All right, guys, have a good one.
Is that this Friday or?